Well, thank you very much. I want to say thanks to Robbie Heiner. I know that all of you are way too young to remember those days when he was here, but I also hope that you somehow can recognize that so many of the seeds that Dr. Falwell planted with people like Robbie Heiner, you are experiencing the fruit of those prayers and that hard work from 40 years ago. When I come to this campus, I'm blown away. The largest Christian university in the world, with the most effective student body leaving from this place and going out to change the world in every discipline imaginable, from medicine, from law, from business, from philosophy to theology. And it is very true that the sun never sets on the graduates of Liberty University across the world. And I hope you understand that there's never been a time in our nation and in our world where we need people who recognize their responsibility, not simply to get an education so that they can make more money or become somebody, but that the education is their preparation to change a very troubled world. And if you don't do it, it's not going to get done. I know that we all like to say yes to things. I said yes to coming here today because I love coming to this campus. It excites me. It invigorates me. I feel like that there's something going on here that is unlike any other campus on all of God's planet. It is extraordinary. So I wanted to say yes to the invitation to be here. I'll be honest with you, I like saying yes anyway, don't you? I mean, hadn't you rather say yes to something than no? It's just a positive thing. That's the way we are wired. As a parent, I always wanted to say yes, although sometimes love means that you have to say no. I like being told yes. When I ask for something, I love it when people tell me that I can have it. And I hate it when people tell me that I cannot. None of us want to be told no to whatever it is. You know, I had to tell my kids no. Now I've got grandkids. I've not told them no to anything yet. I don't plan to. That's the coolest part about the whole deal. When I was governor, I had a bunch of lawyers in my office, and they would come in every day and tell me what I couldn't do. And I said, guys, look, let me explain something to you. I'm not hiring you to tell me no. I could tell myself no and save the money for your salaries. Your job is not to tell me no. Your job is to tell me, how do we get to yes? Now, it may be that it's too expensive. It may be that it's illegal and will get you and me in jail and we won't do it. But it is not your job to tell me no. It is your job to tell me, how do we get to yes? Because that's what we live our lives always to do. You know, if you ask someone out on a date, you want to hear the word yes. I can't imagine somebody calling a person of the opposite gender up and saying, hey, just wanted to call to make sure that you don't want to go out with me this weekend. Because, I mean, if you ask it that way, the answer is, hey, you were right on that one, man. No, I don't. You want a yes answer. If you go to a professor and say, I'd like permission to retake that exam that I flamed out in, he's going to say no, but you want him to say yes. If you call home and ask your parents, could they send, $500 and wire it into your checking account, they're going to tell you no. If they don't, could you give me their name and address, please? I'd like to talk to them. But chances are they may tell you no, but you want them to tell you yes. And by the way, if you ever ask your friends something about you personally, you all often don't really want as honest an answer as you're fishing for. For example, if you say, hey, how do you think this shirt looks on me? You don't want somebody to say, you got to be kidding. Looks awful. Get rid of it. Give it away. wipe the dog with it, do something, but please don't ever wear that, ever again in public. I mean, there are times we just don't want people to be that honest with us. Sometimes, though, in life, and especially as believers, we have to say no. Sometimes we say no to things, not necessarily because of great spiritual reasons. I'll be honest with you. I don't intake of alcoholic beverages, but the truth is it's not because I'm some moral giant. The honest answer is in high school, people offered me beer, and I smelled it. And it smelled like something that had already been in someone else's mouth, not something I wanted to put in mine. I mean, it smelled like something that had gone bad. And I remember saying to my friend who said, "Here, try this." And I got it this close, and I said, "My gosh, that stinks." I said, "Are you sure it's not spoiled?" He said, "No, it's just the way it smells." And I said, "Well, does it taste like that?" He said, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Well, why would you drink that?" He said, "Well, you have to develop a taste for it." Okay, I'm a logical person, all right? And I said, "Okay, let me see if I get this right. Something that I have a natural aversion to, that is repulsive even to smell, much less to taste, you're telling me that if I will continue to consume it repeatedly and break down what is a natural resistance to this hideous smell, that somehow over time my resistance will be so broken down that I will move from aversion to acceptance to addiction." I said, "That doesn't make any sense to me." Now put fried chicken in front of me, I got it, folks, okay? Yeah. And it was the same way with a lot of behaviors. So I have to be honest with you. Some things I didn't get into, not because I was spiritual, it was just I was logical. But there are some things in our lives that I'm convinced that as believers we need to understand we'll never be able to say yes to. And the reason in many ways that America and our world is in trouble, it's not because that ungodly people have said yes to ungodly things. It's that godly people have failed to say no to the ungodly things. And I know that that is not exactly, the most wonderful, positive, uplifting thing to possibly say to a convocation of university students. But let's just remember that throughout history, God's kingdom and its greatness always depended upon people saying no to things that might sometimes even seem pretty harmless. Daniel was offered the king's food, and he said, "No, I don't partake of those things." And he insisted that he just have basically a vegan diet. Obviously, I'm not Daniel. But it was a very specific call of God in his life. It would have been very easy for Daniel to say, "Well, it really doesn't matter that much. It's just food." But it was a specific call in Daniel's life. And he said no to the king's food. David said no to the king's armor. Seemed perfectly normal if he's going to go out and fight a giant. Smart thing to do is to take all the defense mechanisms possible, and the king's armor would have helped him. But it was so heavy, it weighted him down. So he rejected it, and he took the most illogical weapon he possibly could have taken, a sling and 5 smooth stones. Not exactly what most would have gone up against a giant with. Jeremiah was told to just tone it down a little bit. His message of prophecy was really biting to all the political leaders of his day. And he was making some waves and causing people to be extraordinarily uncomfortable. And so the religious people went to Jeremiah and said, "Jeremiah, if you could just we don't mind you being strong You can even be loud. But do you have to call out people like you do? Couldn't you just tone it down a bit? To which Jeremiah said no, he couldn't. It wasn't his message. It wasn't his to tone down. Sometimes I think we believe that God's message is ours to tone down so it might not hurt anyone's feelings or be offensive. I got news for you. The gospel is always going to be offensive to people, period. There'll be some people who will accept it and some people who not just will reject it, but will utterly despise it. You will never moderate it enough, temper it enough to make it where it is acceptable to people who do not want to hear that there is a creator God who has given us life and created us for a divine purpose, and a God to whom we are accountable and responsible. And because He created us and He made the game, He gets to make the rules. And if we follow the rules, we can win. If we don't follow the rules, we will lose. It doesn't matter whether we play it exceptionally well or play it in a way that people applaud us. Play against the rules, and ultimately, you're disqualified and lose the game. Jesus was tempted by Satan on the mountain of temptation. He was tempted to satisfy his own physical needs first by being offered food that he rejected and said, "No, I will not." He said no to the use of power for his own selfish purposes. And he said no to establish his own glory within himself apart from that of the Father. Now, he could have said yes to all of it, but he said no. All of us want to be liked, I get that. We all want to be accepted. My question today, are you willing to be hated? Are you willing to be despised? Are you willing to take the kind of stand that will not make you popular? Are you willing to make the kind of statement, to embrace the kind of cause that may cause you to be the object of ridicule and scorn? Because that's not the easy way. It's the tough way. If going to a Christian university does not make you uniquely different to the point that you develop such a deep sense of personal calling from what God has led you to do, that you are not willing to take man's scorn in order to experience the glory and the grace of God, you may be in the wrong place. But if you believe that you are here, not just to get your head filled with information and knowledge and inspiration, but here to be transformed so that you find God's purpose for whatever it is He wants you to do, and that you're willing to do it whatever the cost, even if it makes you rejected by people at home, your own family, your closest friends, the people one day that you may work with. And let me assure you that if you take the stand for Christ that I believe that He wants His children to take, His followers to take, there will be people who will ridicule and laugh at you, and they will consider your intellectual capacity to be extraordinarily diminished and far below theirs. I, for one, do not believe that as a Christian believer, I have to ever sacrifice intellectual capacity in order to follow Christ. But I also believe that that means that it's important to be intellectually and academically prepared so that if that charge is made, it's a false charge. Because there's nothing worse than matching wits with a person who is attempting to destroy your credibility as a believer, and you go into battle unarmed. And that's why intellectually you should be better prepared than anybody you ever expect to face when you go out in the world, so that if somebody asks you, well, what is it about this whole thing of believing that life is precious? Don't just argue with people and raise the volume in order to somehow think that if you increase the level of your volume, that increases the capacity of your argument, because it doesn't. Learn to ask the questions of the others. See, when somebody asks me, are you anti-abortion? I say, oh, absolutely not. No, I'm for life. I believe that life is precious and has value. But it's not because I'm against abortion. I think that's the symptom. It's not even the issue. The issue is not what we do so much with the child. The issue is whether or not it is a child. And so let's look at that. Let's ask ourselves, biologically, scientifically, is this a human being? You know, I love it when liberals say, let's stick to science. And I love to say, yeah, let's do that. Let's just do that. Because if we do, we will discover that 23 chromosomes from a male and 23 from a female come together at the moment of conception and create a unique DNA schedule that has never existed before, never will exist again in that exact configuration. And it is the immediate conception of a life that has never been. And it's unique. Is it a new life? Is it just an extension of the mother? Biologically, that is irrefutably a unique life and not merely an appendage of the mother. And you say, how can you know that? Because it may not even have the same blood type, much less the DNA schedule. It's not like an appendix, a kidney or a lung. It cannot be separated in some way. It can be rather separated and still survive on its own. And by the way, all of the cellular knowledge that ever will be in that life is right there. Oh, it's going to change forms quite a bit over the course of the gestation period, and after it's born, it will change forms many times again. But the DNA schedule is still exactly the same from the moment of conception. So if somebody wants to argue that point, be prepared to argue it scientifically, because science is on your side, not theirs. And by the way, if they want to argue it philosophically or theologically, great. Engage. Engage confidently. Because ask somebody, do you believe that some people are worth less than others? Do you think that? Most people would say, well, of course not. I mean, then be specific. Do you think black people are worth less than white people? And of course, they'll be outraged. Of course not. Good. Because I don't either. Do you think women are worth less than men? Well, of course not. Good, because I don't either. Do you think that people who have a low IQ are somehow worth less than people who have a higher IQ? Well, no. So you would think that a baby with Down syndrome is still a human being. Oh, yes, yes. You don't think we ought to go around killing all the kids with Down syndrome, do you? Oh, no, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. Okay, good. I'm glad we've established. Because that's really consistent with our founding fathers who said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Truths that are so obvious to us that we don't really have to explain them. That's what we mean by self-evident. All men are created equal. Good thought. And they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why are we endowed with those rights? Because we're all equal. One person is not better than another. One person is not less than another. That is a powerful, powerful recognition of the intrinsic worth and value of every human being. And it means that nobody can say, look, I'm better than you, or you're not as good as me. That is the very essence of your faith and your freedom. If it were not the truth of that, America would never have been. Because we came from nations where people were not considered equal. We are the result of founders who shed their blood to give us voice to the notion that people were not disposable or expendable. Oh, I understand we didn't get it right for a long, long time. But I'm also telling you, with all my heart, folks, the reason that many of us are here today is because our ancestors believed so much in that principle that they actually lived it out. If you'd go back in your family history, you'd probably see some stuff that would surprise you. I know when I was a kid, my dad used to say, "Son, don't look very far up your family tree. Boy, there's stuff up there you don't need to see." I mean, the old man was right, because I started, of course, looking to see, what was he trying to keep from me. And the more I discovered about the family history, the more I realized, man, the old man was right. There's stuff up there I don't need to see. Look, I know where I've come from. I understand my roots. I was no blue blood. My ancestors didn't come over on the Mayflower. They didn't land on the shores of Massachusetts or even Virginia. They were dumped off the shores of Georgia from the debtors' prisons of England and basically told good luck. And there were some scoundrels and scallywags up above me, I'm telling you, and not that far. If I believed that where I started was where I was stuck, I wouldn't be standing here today. And if you believe that, a lot of you wouldn't be in this arena today. You are here because you believe that God has given you a life that gives you value the same as anybody else. And that your life is not less than, and for that matter, it's not greater than. If you believe that, then God's grace will let you do anything. If you don't believe it, you'll spend the rest of your life always trying to get people to say yes to you and hoping that you can say yes to them and please them. The day you understand what it means to be unique in God's eye, a unique creation of Him, is the day that whether people say yes to you or not, you're able to say yes to God. And you'll then have the strength and the courage and the power to say no to the things that take you from Him. Our culture is moving so far away from godly values that it's beginning to be almost unrecognizable from what it once was. This past summer, I heard about what was happening to the COO of Chick-fil-A. He was being essentially boycotted, and the entire chain of 1,600 restaurants threatened because the owner, one of the executives, part of the family, it's a family-owned business, privately held business, made a personal statement about marriage. He didn't condemn anybody. He's not a political activist. He just made the statement that he took to the biblical view and the traditional view of marriage between a man and a woman. Now, a few years ago, that wouldn't have been controversial at all. Today, it's very controversial, and he found himself the object of an extraordinary frontal assault to try to put their entire chain and thousands of people out of work and their company out of business. I was appalled that there were so few people that would stand up for him, not because of what he believed. What he believed is secondary. The fact that in America he had a right to believe it and express it. And I thought, if a person cannot take a stand, even if it's one I disagree with, and somehow not be forced out of business, our country's gone, because then we don't have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our pursuit of happiness is taken away, just as our freedom of speech and freedom of religion would also be taken away. I said, let's just encourage people to go to Chick-fil-A on 1st of August and sort of show their support. Little did I know how many people wanted chicken that day. And it was an extraordinary statement. Not so much of affirming everything that the COO of that company stood for, but of affirming his right to say what he believed in his heart to believe. Today, there's another company. It's owned by a wonderful Christian family. The company is Hobby Lobby. And their folks are under siege because they believe that as a business and as Christians, they should not be required to use the money that they have earned, and money that, by the way, they give generously to missions all over the world, to pay for medications that actually create an abortion. And so the Green family has said, we're not going to do that. We are not going to eat the king's food. We're not bowing to the king's desires. They face a fine of $1.3 million a day. And I'm going to say something. I hope you understand that part of the great work of Liberty is through its affiliate organizations and its law school, like Liberty Counsel, who are helping them fight that battle and standing for that which is right. And every day I say thank God for Matt Staver and Liberty Counsel and the folks that are here, right here on your campus, who help stand for right and for what's true. Now, folks, I'm not Catholic, but I tell you, when the Catholic Church is being told by the government that it has a limit to what it can believe, then just understand you'd better be Catholic with them. For this reason, if the government can tell the Catholic Church how much it can believe, it can tell Liberty how much you can believe. The day that we say yes to a government that limits the dictates of our conscience, that puts a parameter on the realm of our faith, and tells us that we can believe up to a point, but not over the line of what the government deems as acceptable, we have not just lost our country, we have lost our basic fundamental freedom. You must come to the place in your life when you're not just going to say yes to a government that tells you that it will limit you to what you can believe and how you can believe it. We must, in this country, come to the point where we stand and we say, no. No, it is not the government that dictates the limits of our conscience and our souls. Only God Almighty has the power to tell us what our limits are. And He will not allow us to participate in the slaughter of unborn children and in the desecration of those things which to Him are holy. Last month, my wife and I went to the beaches of Normandy, where the D-Day battles were fought, June 6, 1944. It was a cold January day, and we stood on a desolate Omaha beach, not another soul there. And as I stood on that sand, I looked around, and it occurred to me that underneath my feet, where I was standing on sand, 60 years earlier, Americans far younger than me, and in fact far younger than many of you, came out of boats and charged onto that beach knowing full well it was their last day on earth. I stood there with sand underneath my feet. If I'd been there on that day in June, that sand would have been red with their blood. Thousands of them killed that day because they were saying no to something that was sweeping across Europe and would have swept across the world had somebody not been willing to get out of those boats and charge against those beaches and say, no, you are not going to kill people because they're Jews. Most of the people coming out of those boats weren't Jews. They weren't fighting because they were trying to protect their own faith. They were fighting to protect the faith and the identity of someone else. But they knew the difference between right and wrong. And after we left the D-Day beaches, we flew to Poland and went to Krakow. And we went to the factory that Oskar Schindler used to make the pots and pans, but also the factory that saved the lives of over 1,100 Jews. And then we made what was for me one of the most sobering visits of my life as we went to Auschwitz and Birkenau. I stood in front of the sign that says, "Work makes free." It was one of the lies the Nazis told to convince people that if they would work, they would be free. And it was a lie. Because when they entered the gates of Auschwitz, they weren't there to make pots and pans, and they weren't there just to work. They were there to be killed. And I'll never forget standing in the death chamber where 1.1 million human beings, including little babies and small children, were herded after having their clothes and their dignity stripped from them and told they were going to take a shower, and then they would be assigned to their barracks. And when they entered into what they were told was a shower, the Zyklon B gas was dropped into the chamber, and for the next 20 minutes they clawed and struggled and screamed until all of them were finally dead. And over a period of years, 1.1 million stood in that very room where I had stood and were murdered. And I asked myself, why did they go? Why were they compliant? There were more of them than were the guards. Maybe they could have all rushed them and overpowered them, and yes, some of them would have died, but maybe some would have lived. Why didn't they resist? And I don't know that any of us have an answer to that, other than some of them believe the lie that if they just followed along and did what was told, they'd be okay. And I'm afraid there are a lot of Americans who believe that if they just follow along and do what they're told, they'll be okay. I'm here to tell you, if following along something that is immoral, if following along something that is evil, if being compliant with that which is unholy and ungodly is what we're asked to do, we'd better learn how to say no. And today, I beg you, learn to say yes to some things. I know how important and valuable it is to want to say yes, but for the sake of this country, the sake of your future, I beg you with all that is within me, please also learn how to say no. Thank you, and God bless you. It's been a joy, privilege to be with you.